Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Compassionate Accountability meeting. I'm so glad that you are here as usual. And we are going to talk about a very specific and often invisible experience emotional neglect in high achieving families. And this has been coming up a lot lately within my sessions. And if we don't know each other, hi, I'm Karina Ibar Jacobs, licensed psychotherapist and coach, specializing in parentification and complex trauma. I am here to support you regardless. I am grateful that you are here, taking your time out of your day to be here. And back to our topic. If you haven't, please subscribe so that you do not miss any of our live streams every Sunday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And if you are here watching the replay, welcome. Back to emotional neglect. You see, it's easy to assume that neglect only happens in chaotic, visibly dysfunctional homes. But some of the deepest wounds come from households that looked perfect from the outside, where there was structure, success, even privilege, but very little emotional presence. And if you ever felt like your achievements were celebrated, but your feelings were ignored, or like you had to earn love through performance, then this live stream is specially for you. Okay. So I want to first define what we are talking about, what emotional neglect in high achieving families looks like. And hello, hello, wherever you're joining from, say hello, right? Emotional neglect. It means that your feelings, needs, and inner world weren't heard or nurtured in high achieving families. This often happens silently because success masks pain. And this is how perhaps it might have felt for you growing up, right? Maybe you were praised for good grades, but not comforted when you were sad, or you were expected to be mature, independent, or low maintenance, not to take a lot of space. So that deemed you a good child. And emotions like anger, sadness, or fear were seen as dramatic, weak, or inconvenient. And more often than not, conversations were about goals, grades, schedules, or appearances, and not your emotions and how you felt about them, whatever you were going through. And love was conditional on performance, obedience, or image. And in families like these, it wasn't always done to you, right? It wasn't always what was done to you, but it was what was missing. The warm hugs, the tell me how you're feeling, the it's okay to cry, they just weren't there. Or even a simple I love you. Because this kind of childhood is confusing. And you may be wondering, well, but it wasn't all bad, right? Granted, yes, maybe your parents, they were highly educated. Maybe you had material comfort, structure, even opportunities others didn't. And so you learned to downplay your pain. And you may have even told yourself, I had a good childhood, so I should be grateful. Hi, Loli. Hi, it's wonderful to have you here. Welcome back. Or you may be saying, my parents, they worked really hard and they meant well. Granted, I am not here discounting their efforts. Or other people had it worse. But gratitude and trauma can coexist. And just because no one yelled or hit, it doesn't mean that you were you were emotionally safe or seen, because emotional neglect is the trauma of absence. It's that little t trauma that is not so obvious. It's being left alone with your big feelings and taught to suppress them so you wouldn't rock the boat. And that creates patterns that follow you into adulthood. Does that resonate? Let me know in the comments, please. I cannot wait to hear from you. So let's talk about how this shows up later in life. Because emotional neglect doesn't stay in childhood, it rewires how we relate to ourselves and others. And here are some common adult symptoms. This shows up very often with my clients and members as chronic self doubt. You are unsure of your own feelings, always looking to others for what's right. You overfunction. You are the fixer, the achiever, the dependable one, even when you are falling apart. You may feel discomfort with vulnerability too. So you struggle to open up emotionally, even in close relationships. If people are asking how you feel, it's usually a fine, I'm okay. You downplay it. And this leads to low self worth, where you feel like you have to earn love or prove your value constantly, even though other people may perceive you as otherwise, right? You also feel shame around needs. You feel guilty asking for help, rest, or comfort. And you tend to attract emotionally unavailable partners, even drawn to people who feel familiar because they mirror what you grew up with. Does that resonate? Let me know, please, in the comments, because these are not flaws. They are, again, adaptations. They are the way that you learned to attach and to receive love growing up. And they were your nervous system's way of coping in an emotionally limited landscape. And I have to say, I don't want to generalize, but I know that there are also with some of my clients that come from cultures where high achievement is highly emphasized. And don't get me wrong, this is beautiful. And I may say something controversial, but I do have different clients from different cultures. We're talking about, like, right, Latina from Latin America. We also have Caucasian clients and from East and South Asia. And this is something that comes up a lot, where they feel like they basically went to school, are highly successful people, and they did it to please their parents. Granted, they did want to be successful because there are perks. You were disciplined, you had that pressure. However, there is a void because no matter what, there is something that makes you feel like nothing you do is good enough. And here comes the perfectionism. And I see Loli resonating, saying yes. So thank you for sharing, Loli. Um, and that is why there is almost like a myth of being too sensitive. This is the narrative that comes up for a lot of folks who can resonate with this, right? For example, many of us grew up in these families that were told some version of, "Mm, you're too sensitive if you complained," or "don't be so dramatic. I'm doing this for your own good," or "I'm telling you because it's what's best for you," or "we don't need to talk about everything." But what if you were not too sensitive, but instead you were actually attuned, but no one else was attuned to you? And that is a big difference. Emotional sensitivity isn't a flaw or a weakness or dramatic. It's a signal. And when you are shamed for having emotions, you either shut down or become hyper aware, constantly managing others' moods while ignoring your own. You're constantly editing yourself. And I want to pause. I want to look at the comments. If you have any questions or comments, please do let me know, right? So now let's jump into how we begin to heal, right? Let's shift into what you can do to begin healing this invisible wound. And this is where the accountability piece comes in, because it's one thing to name the pattern and another to start breaking it. And of course, we want to do this with compassion. And I want to offer you some 4 trauma informed steps to start reclaiming your emotional self. How does that sound, everyone? All right. I don't see any questions yet, so I will continue. Make sure that you have pen and paper and write this down. Okay. Number one, I want you to name the neglect without gaslighting yourself. Name the neglect without gaslighting yourself. What do I mean by this? Is to stop minimizing your experiences. Many of my members and clients, they often minimize what they went through. Why? Because, yeah, they say to themselves, like, I don't think it was that bad. Other people have it worse, or it could have been worse. And that keeps you stuck. Instead, I want you to try what I needed emotionally wasn't there. And that mattered. I matter. I'm not being dramatic because evidently it's affecting you today. So, yes, it does matter. And a simple practice I can offer you is to write a list of emotional needs you didn't receive growing up. For example, comfort when upset, right? Curiosity about your feelings and permission to rest. If you didn't receive that, write a list of that. Number two, let me see, looking at the comments, okay, is to relearn what it means to have needs. You are allowed to need rest, reassurance, and connection, and comfort. Again, needs are not weaknesses. You don't have to be hyper independent, they're part of being human. And that is why, in this sense, it's important to practice every day, asking yourself, what do I need right now? Then take one small step toward honoring that part without apologizing. This is something that sounds so simple, but you'd be surprised that many of my clients and members, they struggle with this. Just the simple fact of asking, how do I feel now? And what do I need right now? Especially if you grew up other centered or parentified, this is very challenging, even though it sounds so simple. Okay, let me know if this resonates and what works for you also in the comments. And number three, let's see, is to practice emotional expression in safe spaces. Let's face it, not everyone is safe, not every space is safe. So if you never learned how to name your feelings, start slow. Even saying, I feel overwhelmed, or I'm not sure how I feel, but I want to talk. And that is major progress. Okay. Hello, I see Natalie. Hello, welcome back. Hi. So I want you to practice this. So use an emotion wheel. You can Google this, okay, or feelings list to check in daily. And that way you can develop more emotional fluidity and language. I always bring this up because a lot of us are so used to saying, I'm okay. And okay is not a feeling. So get used to naming your emotions. And that is a way to validate yourself and to build self assurance. Share this with a trusted person. If you are able to, with a therapist, with a friend, an accountability partner that is compassionate, or write it in your journal or notebook, wherever. Just make sure that you can identify on a regular basis how you feel, not just I'm okay, which is typical. I ask my clients usually when they're like, oh, yeah, I'm okay. How are you? I'm like, I'm well. Thank you for asking. I'm very happy. I'm grateful that you are here today. So now, how do you truly feel? And they're like, well, actually, I feel exhausted. And then they start talking. And it's because it's such an automatic reaction to say, I'm okay, and to dismiss however we're feeling. Number four, build an inner parent who sees you. Imagine what it would have felt like to be validated, soothed, or protected. And now offer that to yourself, even if it feels awkward. A practice could be when you feel self critical, pause and ask, what would I say to a child I love who felt this way? And then say it to yourself. I know, sounds so simple, but it's true. We want to ideally default to self compassion, as I always mention. I want to pause and ask if any of you has any questions or comments, since tonight's live stream will be a little bit more resumed. It will be shorter than other live streams. So I'm on the lookout. Okay, feel free to ask a question because I want to end with this before I answer any of your questions. I just want to remind you that if you grew up in a high achieving but emotionally neglectful family, and let me say by high achieving, maybe even if others were not high achieving, but there was the expectation of you to abide by these high standards. And let me tell you, in dysfunctional families, there are a lot of double standards. Sometimes, you are expected to perform at a certain rate, to show up a certain way. Meanwhile, you are getting mixed messages, and that can happen too. So, if you did grow up in a family that was emotionally neglectful, unaware, limited, where you were taught to perform and not feel, there's nothing wrong with you. Unfortunately, this is very common, and it makes sense that now you may feel this void. And no matter what you do, you feel like what's going on? Like it's not enough. This is why these practices, as I mentioned, are so important. Just one step at a time, because what they do is they help you begin to validate yourself and take up space little by little, one day at a time, one step at a time. And that may feel uncomfortable, but the more you do it, the more you realize that you have to have your own back. This is something that comes up a lot within our Self Worth Hub membership and with my clients. So now, as an adult, you get to unlearn that. You get to build a relationship with yourself that's not based on achievement, but it's based on presence, on care, and authenticity, because you're not proving anything to anyone. And if you're inside the Self Worth Hub, you already have access to tools that support you in this journey and this kind of healing. Make sure that you are tracking your attendance for a chance to win your monthly self care gift card. And if you are not within the Self Worth Hub yet and this resonated, then you can join before enrollment closes this month. Regardless, I am grateful that you are here. So, either way, I am proud of you for doing this work. Okay. I do not see any comments yet. And it's okay. I know it's a summer night. So folks may be very busy. Regardless, I'm grateful for your time. So, as usual, I want to leave you with a reflection prompt. Are you ready? What was missing emotionally in your childhood? Again, what was missing in your childhood? And how can you give a piece of that to yourself this week? Did you get that? Again, what was missing emotionally in your childhood? And how can you give a piece of that to yourself this week? Did you tend to say sorry a lot? Were you not validated? Were you dismissed? Then how can you validate yourself this week? If after an interaction you feel tense, something doesn't feel right, then take a moment to hold space for that. And that is how we can begin to rewrite the script and show up for ourselves like a loving inner parent. Okay? Does that make sense? Again, thank you for your trust. I will see you next Sunday. Take care of yourselves and please remember your resilience. So, thank you everyone for being here. One last time, I'm looking into the comments. Let's see. Okay, well, goodbye, everyone. Take care. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.